But again, obviously, it depends on the stance on the scriptures, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't.
On the scriptures of the.
Are we going to do this? You want to go there?
Yes, James O'Brien, I want to go there because this is where we're about to disagree, my friend. Respectfully, of course. But yeah, let's go there. Let's.
Want to.
Do you want to go? Okay, what did Jesus say about sexuality?
Hello everybody, Magic Skeptic here, aka Magic Dara, and you're all most welcome to another episode of A Magician's Thoughts. So if you've been watching my channel for any length of time, I'm sure you've become familiar with the kind of, I guess you could call it, debunking pattern that I've been following. I choose various videos and religious targets mostly, sometimes political, and I respond to their videos. I respond to their ideas. Sometimes those ideas come in article form, sometimes they come in video form and what have you, and I essentially deconstruct the claims made by said individuals and reveal them for what I believe to be the fallacious pieces of sophistry that they are. And thus far, I've very much selected people who are on the other side of the fence, right? So I've done videos on Frank Turek, for example, who is a Christian apologist with whom I disagree on basically every tenet of the religious discussion, right? Suffice to say, I've generally attacked individuals. Attacked is maybe a strong word, but I've generally targeted individuals and ideas and people who are on the other side of the fence, right? And so this video is going to be a little bit of a departure because what I'm going to do today is to critique an individual with whom I agree on probably most issues, and the person I'm referring to is none other, and you will have seen this in the thumbnail no doubt, but none other than James O'Brien, who is something of a prolific radio talk show host and author who lives here in the UK. Mr. O'Brien is an incredible speaker, and I adore him. He's actually been hugely inspirational in my activities here on YouTube. His ability to destroy, and I use that word advisedly, his ability to dissect and destroy his opponent's arguments when indeed they are flawed and fallacious is just second to none, really. I'll be brutally honest, I wouldn't fancy having a debate with James O'Brien if indeed we disagreed on something, and as you're about to see in this video, we do in fact disagree. But again, I just want to make it clear from the get-go that this disagreement is a respectful one, and perhaps if I'm mistaken, you, dear listener, can jump into the comments below and point out where I've gone wrong and correct the record. Or, maybe someday, dare I say, Mr. O'Brien himself might see this video and he might be able to correct me where I may have gone wrong. But having thought about this particular disagreement for quite a while and giving this a lot of consideration before I even thought about recording this video, I don't happen to think I am wrong here. And even though James O'Brien might very well be a rather terrifying debate opponent, I would relish an opportunity at some point in the future to sit down and have a chat with Mr. O'Brien. I don't imagine that's ever going to happen because, let's face it, my channel is small fry and James O'Brien doesn't know or care who I am. But hopefully someday this channel will be of a particular profile that he might see this. And Mr. O'Brien, if you do see this, can I just say right off the bat that I love you. I think you're awesome. You're an inspiration of mine, but we just have a sincere disagreement here. And to outline the nature of this disagreement, I'm going to show you a clip from James O'Brien's LBC radio talk show where a preacher called in to defend a rather immoral and, I would say, disgusting view on homosexuality. And yeah, before I say anything else about it, let's just dive right into the clip and I can offer you my commentary as we proceed. As you'll discover, and the reason I call this video more of a nuanced disagreement, I actually agree in spirit with what James O'Brien is trying to achieve here, and I agree with his moral point of view. I just don't agree with the argumentation he uses to respond, and without getting into too many details, I'll leave it there for now, and you can be the judge as we proceed through the following video clip. So, without further ado, I offer you the brilliant, the articulate, and the awesome James O'Brien. And, yeah, let's dive right in.
Walter is in Warrington. Walter, what would you like to say?
Oh, hey, James. Good to speak to you today.
Likewise.
So I'm as you probably spoke with your research, I'm a pastor of a church in Warrington. So we've all heard the stories of the gay conversion therapy of.
Well, Damien hadn't, but I take your point.
Yeah, I think most people. I would presume it anyway. Normally, but you hear the stories of electric shock therapy. Even I read stories of even fathers attacking their daughters who came out as gay, and you hear all these sorts of stories. And obviously, I don't agree with that. I don't think that's right. I think that sort of thing is just abhorrent and just completely wrong.
So this pastor from Warrington begins by trying to establish some common ground, which is admirable, pointing out that he disagrees fundamentally with gay conversion therapy and essentially just the oppression of homosexuals, right? So, yeah, fantastic. We're agreed. I agree with that. James O'Brien evidently agrees with that. No problem thus far. Why do I sense that there's a but coming?
As most, I suppose, well, you say most people. But
I told you.
But if a consenting adult, I know that's the term that's been used, and I know the conversation is more towards, originally the question was about the legal side of things.
Yes.
If a consenting adult came to me as a pastor and explained that he or she had same-sex desires or feelings, whatever word sort of way you want to say it or whatever.
Yes.
And I can't see that how me praying for them to help them overcome that, or again, however you want to word that, is the same as doing the other sort of things that was mentioned.
Okay.
Then sort of out, like you say, your question.
Well, you're beginning on the premise that homosexuality is akin to an illness.
So straight away here, we've run into significant problems. The pastor is wanting to delineate between actively promoting gay conversion therapy on one hand and simply helping a gay person who doesn't want to be gay anymore on the other. In other words, there's a difference, or so alleges this pastor, there is a difference between going out there into the world as a religious adherent and actively promoting the message that homosexuals can convert to become straight people. There's a difference between that and a humble and God-fearing gay person coming to you, a pastor, and asking you to help them become straight. And so, yeah, that's the premise he wants to offer here, to suggest that his approach when a gay person comes to him and asks for help in deconverting from homosexuality, if such a thing were even possible, which it evidently isn't. But his point is that that makes him radically different from the gay conversion therapists that exist in the world. And as James O'Brien is about to take him to task on and point out, and a point which I agree with entirely, I might add, this is a distinction without a difference, arguably speaking. It's a nonsense. To help someone try and escape their homosexuality is to do evil to them anyway, because it assumes something that isn't true, which is that it's possible to deconvert from homosexuality. And all this actually does in the long run is further complicate that homosexual person's feelings and make them feel even more self-hatred. And it's obviously going to have a serious impact on somebody's mental health to try and change their actual factually existing nature. It's going to confound the problem, isn't it? But let's listen to James O'Brien respond, because his response is, as per usual, fantastic.
No, definitely not akin to an illness.
How hard would I have to pray to make you gay?
No, I understand
I'm going to insist that you answer that question. How hard would I have to pray to make you gay?
I don't believe it's about how hard anyone has to pray for anything.
Well, all right. How often would I have to pray? How likely is it that I could pray you gay?
From my honest point of view, from my honest belief, I don't believe it's possible.
So how can you pray someone straight?
Because this is how I'll answer that. So this is how I would view it, again from my point of view, from my
just so you know, I if I'm not satisfied with your answer, I will just ask you that same question again when you finish talking. Just so you know. All right. So the question is, how can you pray someone gay if you can't pray someone straight?
So I absolutely love this question that James O'Brien poses. If you can't pray somebody gay, then how would it be possible to pray somebody straight, right? Surely it could go both ways. Now, if you're a Christian or if you're sympathetic to Christianity, which I know some of my viewers are, you might be screaming right now and pulling out your hair and yelling at the monitor and saying something along the lines of, oh, but Magic Skeptic, Of course you can't pray somebody gay because that's not in accordance with God's will. God will only allow prayers that are in accordance with his will to be answered, or at least some sample of them to be answered. But if that's your response, then what is the point in praying in the first place? If God is only going to do what he wants in the end of the day, or at the end of the day, then doesn't that nullify prayer altogether? Praying for something that's in opposition to what God is permitting, which in theory, if you're a Christian, is everything. Surely everything that happens is under God's guidance, right? So if something is happening, then that means God has permitted it, because God wouldn't permit something that God doesn't agree with, save for the example of free will, right? Obviously, there are Christians who will argue that God doesn't intervene in our free will, and that, you know, if I'm going to murder someone, God won't intervene there because God has given us free will, and the price of free will is that people can commit moral evil. I understand that, but if that's what you're arguing, is that one way or another arguing that homosexuality is a choice, which we know factually that it isn't. So what we're talking about is someone's nature. And if someone's nature is that they are gay, or if someone's nature is that they're straight, isn't that precisely what God intended? Doesn't God create beings with their nature intact, right? Or have natures evolved out of God's creation that God did not intend? But that would mean that God has produced something that he didn't intend, which means it's arguably a mistake. And Christians tend not to believe that God can make mistakes. So you see, you get into real theological riddles here, don't you? And it's a huge problem. So coming back to the question, if I can't praise someone gay, that surely means I can't praise somebody straight. And you can't just appeal to, but it's God's will for people to be straight, whereas it's not God's will to pray that a prayer should allow somebody to be gay, right? You can't do that, because both homosexuality and heterosexuality are natures that exist in reality, which means that God created them that way, unless you're going to suggest that God created some people gay in order to test their nature and see if they would act on their supposedly sinful behavior. And if you're going to suggest that that's the kind of God you believe in, then the kind of God you believe in is an asshole. The kind of God you believe in is a prick. You want to create somebody with homosexual inclinations, a nature of that type, and then forbid it. That's just disgusting. And so, yeah, again, you get into real theological riddles here. But suffice to say, James O'Brien's question here is awesome. And listen to this pastor trying to wriggle out of the question and dodge it. It really does make for entertaining viewing.
So I believe that just as I would pray for somebody who is in a, not same-sex desire, but in, what you call a straight relationship. So somebody that has those desires towards that same person of the opposite sex, that I would pray, we would pray together if they came to me and said that they're having these feelings and they don't want them because they want to save themselves to a marriage or etc.
Yeah.
It's the same as saying, for me, it's the same as saying that about somebody that says they're gay. So it's not that with being gay is worse, or being gay is the worst thing that anybody could do, or the worst act that anybody could do.
No, because they'd still be gay.
Yeah, of course they'd still be
gay. So you're just going to try and get them to not have a sex life.
Again, the pastor here just repeats his point. This idea that if the gay person comes to him because they want to get married to a woman, probably because they live in a family where they haven't had the ability to out themselves yet or to come out of the closet, probably because they come from families that are not very open to the idea of homosexuality. So this homosexual person is living a lie. They might even be involved with a woman, assuming it's a gay man. They might even be involved with a woman who is potentially going to be their bride. And so they come to this vicar or this priest or this pastor, and they've asked this pastor to pray the gay away, to pray them straight. And rather than actually tell them, no, your nature is completely natural and normal, which would be the loving thing to do, instead the pastor hops enthusiastically on board with this project of trying to pray them straight, right? And as James O'Brien rightly points out, even if this were successful, they'd still be gay. They'd just be a gay person who was not having a sex life. They'd be a gay person who was not acting on their own intrinsic nature, right? And that is just crazy. That obviously isn't a solution to this problem. It just creates self-hatred and mental health problems and just chaos. And it's ultimately and inevitably going to fail, isn't it? Because that relationship can't survive. How can it possibly survive if one's intrinsic nature is to not actually be sexually attracted to the partner that they're supposed to spend the rest of their life with? And this is exactly, of course, what James O'Brien is raising here. And so this might sound like thus far James O'Brien and I are in violent agreement. And you're right if that's what you're noticing. But we're about to get to the point where James O'Brien and I part ways in this conversation. So sit tight and we'll get to it momentarily.
No, definitely not. I wouldn't try and get them.
What then? So what are you praying? What are you praying for then? With the gay person?
Yes, obviously, if they have come to me, so it's not something, for a start, it's not something I will go to them and say, you're wrong, I need to pray about this, let me pray for you.
Yeah.
If they've come to me...
But neither are you going to say when they come to you, say, well, don't be silly, there's nothing to pray for, just go, I hope you find someone to love. You're not. You're going to say, I'm going to help you fight your natural feelings.
Oh my God, thank you, James O'Brien. Absolutely right. Yes. If you were a really good person, if you were actually a nice person, if you were a moral person, you wouldn't tell the gay person, yes, let me help you escape your natural loving feelings. But if you were a bigot, if you were an immoral person, you might say to that gay person, okay, yeah, great. Let me help you contradict your intrinsic nature. Let's warp your mind and give you an even larger problem to deal with. Let's give you a mental health problem and confound your feelings about yourself and help you hate yourself. That sounds like a good plan. James O'Brien, I love you.
No, I wouldn't say that. No, definitely not. I'm honest.
But that's what you'd be doing. That's what you'd be doing.
I'm an honest person on that one. And I wouldn't say to them, do as you wish. If they've come to me and they've asked me...
So in other words, if they've been inculcated into homophobic thinking, or they're victims of a culture that preaches against homosexuality, they come to you because they don't want to be homosexual, or they don't want to do homosexual acts or have homosexual feelings, you're like, you're basically the drug dealer, aren't you?
And here's where James O'Brien's logical deconstruction of this pastor's argument reaches its crescendo. Remember, this pastor called in and started off by pointing out, in his view, that there is a distinction or a relevant delineation between those who are actively trying to deconvert gay people, the so-called gay conversion therapists, that there's a difference between those people and a so-called honest pastor who just helps a gay person who comes to them of their own free will and volition and asks for help in deconverting. The pastor wants us to buy that there's a relevant difference between those two options. And James O'Brien here rightly points out that if a gay person comes to you with such a request, it's not out of their own free will or volition. It's because they are in fact the victim of a homophobic culture or a homophobic family that has indoctrinated them and inculcated them into believing that their very own nature is improper and that it must be, to one extent or another, symptomatic of a sinful predisposition or some kind of an immoral choice that they're making, right? And so this is absolutely perfect. This is where the logical deconstruction reaches its crescendo and the pastor is revealed, intentionally or not, to be the bigot that he actually is.
And like I said, when I started originally, it's not about so much just about...
Yeah, but I'm going to do that thing I told you I was going to do. If you can't pray yourself, if I can't pray you gay, how can you pray someone else straight?
No, it's not about me praying. It's about they've come and asked. So if they want that,
but then you as a good citizen, never mind as a man of God, you should be telling them that they've got nothing to be ashamed of, and that their feelings are natural and beautiful and God's will.
Again, obviously, it depends on the stance on the scriptures, doesn't it?
No, it doesn't.
On the scriptures of the.
Are we going to do this? You want to go there?
Yes, James O'Brien, I want to go there because this is where we're about to disagree, my friend. Respectfully, of course, but yeah, let's go there. Let's.
I want to.
Do you want to go? Okay, what did Jesus say about sexuality?
Jesus didn't, but if you believe all scripture is God-breathed.
No, I want to know what Jesus said.
Just as much.
I want to know what Jesus said.
Gay or straight, he never said any.
Didn't say a word about it, did he?
He actually did say one thing.
No, he didn't.
He did, if I can say it. If you let me.
Well, yeah, go on.
He said, "This is why a man must leave his house, his family, and be united to his wife, and that's the way that God created them."
No,
that's
didn't.
What Jesus said.
No,
he did. He was talking about marriage in the book of Matthew.
Yeah, all right. So what did he say about sexuality?
I was just saying that a man and a woman
what did he say about homosexuality?
Homosexuality? No, he never said a word about
Not
homosexuality.
a sausage. So when someone comes to you and tells you that they're gay, tell them they've got nothing to be ashamed of, and it's God's will, and that if there was anything wrong with it, God wouldn't have made us like this.
So here's where we disagree. And just remember, I agree entirely with the moral point that James O'Brien is making here. right? I not only believe that homosexuality is a sexuality, I agree with Christopher Hitchens' phraseology on this. It's not only a sexuality, it is a form of love. Gay people should be entitled to live their life like anybody else does. And they shouldn't be made feel like their nature is improper, sinful, or to one extent or another immoral. Because it's just your nature, right? There's nothing wrong with being attracted to members of the same gender. It's not an issue. So again, I agree entirely with the point that James O'Brien is trying to make here. But where James O'Brien and I part ways in this conversation is when he reaches to the example of Jesus. James O'Brien says, what did Jesus say about sexuality? And he's quite right in pointing out that Jesus has never said anything about sexuality. Jesus never forbids homosexuality. He never promotes sexuality or homosexuality. He never says anything about it at all. The problem with this rhetoric is that it presupposes the idea that if Jesus has said something about a particular issue, that we should take it seriously. And that if he hasn't commented on a particular issue, we shouldn't take it seriously. And so, yes, Jesus hasn't mentioned homosexuality. He hasn't forbidden it. And so, therefore, homosexuality must be permissible. Make sense? And I'm sure a lot of you would buy that. I don't buy that because, first of all, while Jesus didn't mention homosexuality specifically, Jesus did, in fact, endorse the Old Testament. And he endorses it multiple times. And it is in the Old Testament where you will find all of these passages and statements about the sinful nature of homosexuality. The Old Testament not only points out that homosexuality is an abomination, quote unquote, but it also recommends execution for any budding homosexual. Right? That is undeniable. The Old Testament is homophobic in the extreme. What did Jesus say about the Old Testament? Jesus said, and I quote, that not a jot or tittle of the old law shall be forgotten. This particular message of endorsement for the Old Testament, however, is worded differently depending on which Bible you want to purchase. So here's another wording, a wording which I haven't memorized, so I'll read it directly to you. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or stroke shall pass from the law until all is accomplished. Right? So again, that is Jesus specifically endorsing the Old Testament, reminding us that all of the old law still counts. Right? So this can't be done. You can't just hand wave away the Old Testament, James O'Brien. You can't just say that the Old Testament doesn't count simply because Jesus didn't mention homosexuality. You certainly can't say that homophobia can't be justified simply because Jesus doesn't mention it. Yes, Jesus doesn't mention sexuality specifically, but he does endorse the Old Testament. So I'm afraid, Mr. O'Brien, that you're on the losing side of a theological discussion here. Now, does that mean that Magic Skeptic endorses the Old Testament view of homosexuality? Of course not. I think the Old Testament is disgusting. I just happen to think that the New Testament is equally disgusting because it endorses the Old Testament, right? You don't get to appeal to the example of Jesus to purify or to sanitize your Christian biases here. And look, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe James O'Brien isn't a Christian, but he certainly seems to be trying to defend the Bible here from a homophobic interpretation. But when your figurehead, Jesus Christ himself, endorses the Old Testament, a testament which includes homophobic statements and outright genocidal attitudes, you can't possibly defend this. You can't say that homosexuality is permitted by the New Testament simply because Jesus didn't condemn it specifically. When Jesus endorses the Old Testament, he is by extension endorsing the homophobic views of the Old Testament. It's that simple. But let's assume I'm wrong about that and let's steelman the proposition, right? Let's assume James O'Brien is right when he says that Jesus says nothing about sexuality, so therefore we should just assume that he was okay with gay people, right? Let's just take that at face value. Even then, there's a massive problem here because Jesus did in fact comment on other matters that James O'Brien and I would presumably agree are abhorrent and disgusting. The Old Testament promotes slavery. It regulates slavery. It tells us how much we can beat our slaves, who exactly we can enslave, and so forth. Jesus did in fact comment specifically on slavery, and he endorses it. And again, I've got some quotations here. It says here in Luke 47, and I'm going to read it to you here directly. Jesus says the following: "The servant who knows the master's will and does not get ready or does not do what the master wants will be beaten with many blows. But the one who does not know and does things deserving punishment will be beaten with few blows. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. Now, I submit to you, James O'Brien, that you wouldn't agree with beating people up, and you certainly wouldn't agree with slavery. The reason I phrased it both ways there is because some people will look at this passage and say it's just talking about indentured servitude, or just paying a servant or an actual servant working for you. But even if you sanitize this quote by viewing it that way and divorcing it of its slavery message, and you just want to make it about servants and working for people, this still endorses beating people up for getting things wrong. Now, James O'Brien wouldn't agree with corporal punishment like that, nor do I. But if we're going to use James O'Brien's principle here, the principle being, did Jesus say anything about this immoral thing? Well, Jesus did say that it's okay to beat people up, even people who aren't fully familiar with the rules, right? So it's just a case that Jesus recommends that we beat those who are unfamiliar with the rules a little bit less. If you are familiar with the rules, your beating should be much more severe.
Your punishment must be more severe.
So guys, this is a huge problem. You cannot use as a rhetorical device or a argument in a theological discussion the idea that if Jesus didn't comment on it, therefore it's fair game. Because if you use that principle, then I have to hold your feet to the fire on the things that Jesus did comment specifically on, such as giving masters permission to beat their servants and or slaves, depending on your interpretation. And again, James O'Brien wouldn't agree with that. He would say, no, of course, employers can't beat their employees, and masters can't beat their servants, and slave owners can't beat their slaves. James O'Brien wouldn't agree with any of that, and he wouldn't agree with slavery from the word go. But if we hold to his logical principle here, the idea that Jesus has or hasn't commented on something, well, then James O'Brien will be forced to condone this message, because this is something that Jesus has commented specifically upon and clearly endorses the idea of beating people up. So I submit to you, James O'Brien, that suggesting to this pastor that he's wrong simply because Jesus hasn't specifically forbidden homosexuality is wrong-headed. And while I agree with your moral intent here, it is a mistake to appeal to the person of Christ in this debate. Because if this pastor was better informed, and if he was more articulate and better at debating, he would have raised the example I just raised with you, and he would have revealed your position for the inconsistent position that it actually is. So here's my recommendation, and here's what I would do if I were James O'Brien in future. My response to this pastor would have been to simply say, why should I care what Jesus said, what the Bible says, what the Old Testament says, or what the New Testament says? Why should I care at all? This is an Iron Age textbook, and it has all of the symptoms of that fact. It seems as though this book was written by Iron Age shepherds who knew little more than any other person living in the Iron Age. They didn't know enough to know that the sun is the center of the solar system, right? They might have thought the earth was flat. They thought homosexuality was an abomination, and so on and so forth. Clearly, the Bible is not the best repository of any conversation we should be having in 2021. And on that note, I'll quote Sam Harris. We should be having a 21st century conversation about everything. Let's leave the Iron Age textbooks behind. And the next time somebody calls James O'Brien's show, I hope that rather than getting into a debate about what Jesus permitted and didn't permit, James O'Brien will just say, why should I care at all what the Bible says? This pastor is wrong, and James O'Brien agrees with me that he's wrong. But James O'Brien is wrong when he appeals to the example of Christ, because Christ had some nice things to say, but he also evidently had some pretty disgusting and crappy things to say. So he's not the best moral arbiter either. But before we wrap up, let's finish out the video and see where James O'Brien takes this with this pastor, and then I'll offer a final comment.
But like I say, if they've come to you and said that they want you to pray about that...
No. You've created a culture in which they don't want to be gay. You preach that there's something wrong with it, and then you think you get a free pass on being a good guy when they come to you and ask for help in resisting their natural urges.
Yeah, because if you believe in the entirety of the Bible,
Bible. Oh, okay. You believe in the entirety of the Bible?
Yeah.
Okay, what are you wearing? What are you wearing at the moment?
A woolen jumper and a pair of jeans.
What are the jeans made of?
Probably cotton, I think.
So you're wearing wool and cotton at the same time, which Leviticus calls an abomination.
But that's cultural law, not that's ceremonial law. Cultural law.
Oh, okay, right. Where do you stand on shellfish?
Again, it's cultural law.
Oh, I see. So those laws are not. You don't abide by the full content of the scriptures when you're doing it, but when it's stuff you don't want to do, then it's really important.
No, because that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying
it totally is.
No, it's not, because different things apply in different ways.
Okay, right. Yeah.
Prophet's wisdom, knowledge, sort of thing. Everything applies in different ways.
Do you even believe this, or do you just need to pay the bills?
No, I don't get paid for being a pastor.
Good grief! So you do this for fun or power?
No, definitely
power,
not.
standing
Definitely
in the community, right?
Sort of things you have
that's what you get out of it. It's vanity.
But
that's being fed.
My original point wasn't about any of that anyway.
Your original point was that if someone comes to you and asks for help in not being gay, you're going to pray with them and punt the lie that something might come good at the end of it. And the idea that you can pray...
It was about the law.
Walter, mate,
it was about the law.
You're a disgrace.
And the law can't
You're a disgrace.
Prayer, certain prayers wrong and certain prayers right.
You know it as well. I can hear it in your voice. I can hear the desperation in your voice.
If it calls certain prayers wrong and certain prayers right, when does it stop?
Do you know what I'm going to do, Walter? I'm going to pray for you, but my God, I'm going to pray for the people you corrupt as well.
And James O'Brien, we return to more or less violent agreements. Yes, it is ridiculous for this pastor to point out that he follows the whole Bible, and then James O'Brien takes him to task on this by pointing out some of the sillier statements from the Bible, such as not being able to mix fabrics and the outlawing of shellfish and what have you, and again reveals this pastor to be the inconsistent thinker that he is. And so yes, I absolutely love this point. But I will say, and again, this is probably not going to be the most popular point, I do view this pastor as a victim in all of this, because he's not wrong when he extrapolates the message of homophobia from the Bible. The Bible is a homophobic document, and coming full circle, James O'Brien's comment about Jesus not mentioning sexuality specifically is not a defeater for the Bible's homophobia. Because Jesus, again, endorses the Old Testament, which is undoubtedly homophobic and murderous in its intent in relation to homosexuality. And so this pastor is as much a victim of the indoctrination that James O'Brien himself condemns. And so I do have a sense of sympathy for this pastor, but I do agree with James O'Brien when he says that he is a disgrace. Because at what point do we stop excusing a person's own personal responsibility? Yes, this pastor was indoctrinated, but at what point do we say, you know what, you just have to grow up and smell the roses and realize that your worldview is a bigoted, ridiculous, unfounded, factual or unfactual mess, right? I agree with James O'Brien here. This is very, very silly indeed. And yes, this pastor is a disgrace, but he's not wrong when he interprets the Bible as a homophobic document. But he is wrong to live by it, because if he were more informed and if he were more willing to think through his position, he would realize that he should not be consulting the Bible on any moral question. And I would say the same to Mr. O'Brien. He should not be appealing to the example of Jesus either. So guys, that brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed this more nuanced discussion today. As you can tell, I love James O'Brien. I think he's fantastic. I have a great deal of respect for him. We just happen to sincerely disagree on whether or not one can appeal to the example of Jesus in making a theological point. Again, my point would simply be to say, why should I care what Jesus or the Bible more generally says about anything? And so, thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like in it. It costs you nothing, and it gives me everything, guys. It helps my video achieve more success in the algorithm. And, you know, if you did like it and this is your first time visiting the channel, do jump in to the comments below and say hi. We can hash it out there if there's anything we disagreed on. I love responding to people in the comments. But better yet, if you did enjoy it, do consider hitting that subscribe button. And if you do, don't forget to check the bell notification icon. That way you'll be able to stay up to date with all things on the channel, and you'll even be notified as and when my latest videos go live. So thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.